Southern Oregon University and a trustee of the Global Institute of Creative Thinking. Mark is a distinguished scholar in creativity research, guiding programs that cultivate creative capacities, and, I think I've already said, a trustee of the Global Institute of Creative Thinking. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Edmund. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you again. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank the sponsors, UNESCO, OECD, Frankie Lowe. I don't know where Frankie went, but it's a pleasure to be here and have this opportunity. I really enjoyed that last talk. I could probably use 2 of your slides, but that's nice. The nice mesh there. And I do firmly believe in health and creativity are inextricable, but there are a couple of very common messages. And I'm not sure I know how to change my slide. Yes, it's not. It is this. Okay. I've been asked to talk about the landscape of creativity assessment, and I will make a point of connecting to the idea of aligning assessment with education. When I thought about landscape, my first inclination was a little bit hesitant. I felt like I might be an outlier with this talk, and that's in part because focus of my career, spanning, I hate to say it, 40-some years, has been creativity research. And I'm trained as a cognitive psychologist. I drifted into psychometrics. 40 years ago, you had to do that if you wanted to do any good work on creativity. Maybe you could do some theory. But anyway, and over the years, I have done interdisciplinary work on creativity, which I also think is very beneficial to really understand it. History, genetics, politics even, economics, clinical work, you name it, it's helpful, and I've probably done a little of it. But I think I was asked to do the landscape in part because I have been doing this so long. It literally goes back to the 1970s when I was an undergraduate, when I found the topic, and it thrilled me, and I've been doing it ever since. The handbook on the right came out last year. I co-edited it. Wonderful book on the specifics of assessment, and again, pretty interdisciplinary. We have Richard Florida, for example, on the creative economies and neuroscience, semantic networks, divergent thinking. Very good work on assessment. I am going to use a couple of tactics. One of them was actually the outlier idea, because in studies of creative thinking, and one of the tricks I use when I am working with students and attempting to encourage their creativity or talk to teachers about how to encourage creativity, part of it's tactical. That is the intentional, mindful decisions you make to increase your originality, to broaden your perspective, and so on. There's an article I wrote on tactics, and there's an Encyclopedia of Creativity, which is being revised, wonderful source, 200 plus articles. One on tactics, I wrote, it's okay. But my point is about tactics and the benefits of an outside perspective. In fact, landscape is a really nice metaphor for a tactical form of thinking or two. Landscape to me kind of implies connecting with nature, and that may be my own bias because I just love nature. I'm outdoors every day, and it just means a great deal to me. Here's a picture about a half mile from where I live. It's kind of a landscape, but it was on my phone and close to home. The landscape really helps give a big picture, and really that's the message today, or the approach today, let's say, is to approach things from a landscape. So it's not so much where we are, it's how we got here. but I will attempt to say a few things about what we might do from where we are. But some of this is going to sound historical. In fact, to have fun, I thought about some of the things I do in my assessment courses, some of which are really afield. Very interesting article by Ling Cao on the zero, the invention of the zero. And you may be thinking, what the heck? But that's relevant. Measurement involves numbers. It's kind of interesting. I don't know whether they were discovered or created. Probably both. But think about your life without zero. Well, it was invented. It's apparently a multiple. That is, it was invented in more than one place at about the same time. It'd be fun to go into the invention or discovery of the zero, but we're going to move closer to the topic at hand. This is a little closer. We've got some monks here. There was a time, quite some time ago, when monks in Asia received extensive training. The training lasted 7 or 8 years. And then at the end of 7 or 8 years, they had to prove what they had learned, and they were assessed. Well, guess what? The assessment was 7 or 8 years long. It covered everything that they were taught. 7 or 8 years of training and 7 or 8 years of assessment. No sampling, which is now at the heart of assessment techniques. Sampling of items, sampling of individuals, all kinds of different sampling. And I will argue is a problem for us in creativity assessment. Would you like to have taken a class where the professor's name was boring? In fact, I almost had a picture of someone yawning there, but I thought, that's not good. And he was brilliant. You got to give him that. He was studying intelligence, not creativity, but he had an idea that is an important one, relates to sampling, but all of assessment. And he came right out and said that intelligence is what the test tests. Now, what do you think of intelligence if it is only what is tested by a test? That's not really going to say much. It doesn't have much natural importance in the natural environment, which is almost the opposite of what I would like, and one of the trends you can see in the creativity literature going back to at least the 1980s. Paul Torrance touched on it even earlier, but in the 1980s and 90s, people started to develop tests that were more predictive of real-world creativity. And fortunately, those tests are pretty reliable and fairly frequently used, and kind of the opposite of Boring's criticism of intelligence tests. We do still have a little bit of an issue. In fact, I think it's epitomized in the neurosciences. I think the neurosciences are contributing just enormously to our understanding of creativity, and it's about time. For much of my career, the neuroscientists didn't think creativity was objective enough to study. Fortunately, they changed the ways. They now see the value, and my goodness, there is a huge amount of excellent work. There is also a sampling problem. It is rare to find neuroscientific work that is not done in a laboratory. And that gives them enormous internal validity, that is experimental control, but questionable external validity, that is generalizability. And that's the same issue of assessments that apply to the natural environment. So the neurosciences are terrific in one way, internal validity, but often lacking in external validity. And it really is a sampling issue. They're sampling behaviors in the laboratory, perhaps in an fMRI machine or whatever, and it just doesn't apply all that well. Getting much closer to the current state, the landscape, or the current landscape, includes AI. And in fact, the neurosciences really joined the game 20 years ago, just a guess, and of course it wasn't any one day, but in the last, I'll say 5 or 6 years, AI and generative AI in particular has really jumped into creative studies and assessment. tests, a given designed by AI, and especially scoring. There are many people who think that AI can accurately score several different kinds of tests of creative potential, including divergent thinking. And all that's great. AI is a tool. Unfortunately, there is also an apparent camp that believes that generative AI is creative. And they call it creative. And they use that word. And if you look closely, which I have, some people talking about this obviously are just not being careful with their language, to put it bluntly. And you do see this all the time in creative studies. I don't think there's a test of creativity. We have many reliable tests which estimate the potential for creativity. But because they are tests and a sample of behavior, they are not tests of creativity. They're assessments of the potential for creativity. And that's a big difference. The problem with, or the reason I mention that is because most people don't word it that way. They'll do research and they'll write about a creativity test, and that's fine. It's just simple language. But if you look carefully, there are many papers in the field that just come right out and say that AI is creative. And this scares me. It scares me because, and I've attempted to put this in an article that just came out about 2 weeks ago, about the misleading definition. This scares me because if we view AI as creative, even though it uses very different processes from what humans use, it is possible that our expectations about creativity will change. And those expectations may hit the classroom, and they will hit assessment efforts. And all of a sudden we will be assessing and defining creativity based on what AI can do, and not as much on what is unique to human creativity. And there are a large number of things which are unique to human creativity that are outside of what AI can do. And I'll throw out intrinsic motivation and problem finding as two. I'll talk about one or two others here. I mention this as a kind of direction of effect thing because it makes sense to me that we can learn from AI. But to change the definition of creativity based on AI is going from engineering and AI to creativity. And in my eyes, we should look at the 100 years of creativity research and use that to interpret what AI does. It's a very different, it's the opposite direction of effect. And my biggest concern is, in fact, how changing expectations will influence the classroom, including assessment efforts. We could talk about the landscape. This has been fairly historical so far, but I did think about culture, and of course, you need to broaden your perspective beyond your own culture, and it's kind of odd for me to be saying that here. I'm not at home. I'm not in Kansas anymore. I'm in France, but so this may not be an issue for you folks. I did have one experience. I don't know if I listed it. Yeah, Lego. I worked for Lego for a while. Developed some tests and some materials for teachers. We released them in the U.S. and they said, okay, let's release them in China and in Germany. Don't ask me why those two, but those were two starting points. And it wasn't just a matter of translation. It was localizing. It's not just the language when you understand, to understand and support creativity. And I realize I'm probably speaking to the choir there. And in fact, so we could broaden the idea of landscape and get a historical perspective and look at where we are and how we got here. And we could do culture. We could also, as a matter of fact, use philosophy and question our assumptions about, in my case, my assumptions about psychology, perhaps cognitive psychology or psychometrics. This article is about intentionality. It's very philosophical. Very good journal, very good writer and article about intentionality, and it's very relevant to what I was just saying about AI, because this is one of the things you do not see in generative AI that you do see in human creativity. You see intentionality. It's what I believe is an important addition to how creativity should be defined. And I believe we should include intentionality and authenticity, being truthful and expressing oneself. And AI doesn't have a self. there is no opportunity for self-expression. So intentionality and authenticity are two of the unique characteristics of, in fact, I call it authentic creativity, what I could just say human creativity, and lacking in AI. So in addition to the intrinsic motivation of problem finding I mentioned earlier, I would say that a definition of creativity that's the most useful for measurement and for education would include, well, I'll say those four things: problem finding, intrinsic motivation, intentionality, and authenticity. Instead, as I said, I see a bit of a trend moving away from this. Maybe one of the things that's closest to one of the landscape perspectives or tidbits that's closest to the idea of aligning assessment with education actually goes back to J.P. Guilford, who's one of the very big names in creativity assessment, coined the phrase divergent thinking, although he called it divergent production. He did all kinds of great things for the field of creativity. If you look at some of his early writings, he had a phrase, and frankly I meant to get it right and quote it, but I can paraphrase it, that's all I can do. Guilford at one point said, if we can fulfill the creative potential of every individual just a little bit, the cumulative impact will be overwhelming. And I love that idea. Just all we need to do is fulfill every student's potential, or everyone's, any little improvement. And if you think about the cumulative effect, which Guilford did, and this is actually one of the trends I have seen. Again, I've got a 45-year career, let's say, and half of that is a trend such that creativity is becoming socially important. It isn't just a part of one's personality or health, although it is both of those, but it's important in terms of society, solving societal problems. And there's a pretty good body of research coming at this from various angles. I think at the bottom there's some very good work on moral creativity. Bob Sternberg calls it transformational creativity, and by that he means transforming society. Transformation is also a cognitive concept in creative studies, intellectually transforming it, but in this context it has to do with using creativity to transform and improve society. And we could briefly touch on the assessment angle, because there are creativity assessments that are developed specifically to get at moral creativity and, on the flip side, the dark side of creativity. But I need to move along here and offer some conclusions. I did use a couple of tactics here, and I didn't do it all that systematically, but I started by talking about outliers, that is an outside perspective, shifting your perspective, which I hope we can do by taking the entire landscape of creativity assessment into account. I actually mentioned look to nature when I introduced the metaphor of the landscape. There are several tactics embedded in this talk. I did mention the problems with sampling, and I applied that mostly to the neurosciences. It would apply to a certain degree to the work on generative AI. The PISA assessment is very good. I would say has not suffered from that particular problem, other than the fact that it doesn't cover a huge number of domains, but it does recognize domain specificity. It has that certainly going in favor of it. My biggest concern and message has to do with the idea of potential. And this is something, your last slides, the last presentation had assessment to unlock what could be. Do I have that right? And that's where I think assessment should be going. And Guilford saw potential long ago. But between Guilford and about 2010, that disappeared. Creativity assessments, the emphasis was on objectivity, being objective, and we lost a great deal with that. We stopped looking carefully at creative potential. And of course, this is the street light. We're assessing creativity here because the light's better. Well, you're going to miss creativity, folks. You're not going to find your keys. And that really is, I think, the most important thing we can be doing in creativity assessment to align with education, to be sure that our assessments do recognize creative potential and do not just emphasize manifest, objective, creative performances. And on that point, I will conclude. If you have questions, I don't know if we have a minute, but also my contact information is at the bottom there. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mark. And I think we're still behind time, and for fairness, we'll have questions. We'll catch you at the break, but thank you for that. Those insights. I think you've hit on one of the central dilemmas here, which is we try to assess these things. I believe we should try to assess these things because they're important, and if there's not assessment, they never get the airtime they deserve. But there are such risks in trying to pin down something like creativity that we need to be very, very careful. So I think that question and some of those answers